All right. Hi, everybody. I am super excited to share with you today the daily recap from the Wild Wonder Nature Journaling Conference. And I have my nature journal right here. Hopefully my sound is working okay. I'm actually using a different microphone than usual because for some reason my fancy new microphone is not working. It might have something to do with the fact that my pet snake is all wrapped up in the cords, but hopefully this sounds all right. Put a comment into the chat box over on the side if there's something really weird with the sound. Maybe the quality just won't be as good. But I'm super excited to share my pages from today so you can get an idea of what happened. And this is especially for people who weren't able to make it. Maybe you missed some classes. Maybe the hours are really challenging for you. So right now I'm going to show you what happened on the third day of the Nature Journaling Conference. And hopefully when I switch to my document camera, my snake won't get too upset or try to bite me or anything like that. So I'm going to switch over to my document camera and start with the poem from the beginning of the day. So let me adjust the exposure here a little bit. So this was day 3 of the Wild Wonder Nature Journaling Conference 2021. And right here you can see my attempt to sort of get the information about the daily challenge. This was very early. I slept in a little bit this time, and I think I was eating breakfast when while sitting here watching Jack give the challenge, and he connected it to Fearless Friday. So some of you might know about Fearless Friday from the Nature Journal Club, and he just, as his challenge said, to give yourself permission to be wherever you're at. Don't necessarily push yourself too hard during the conference, but also to remember that in your nature journal is a place to try things out and not worry about it too much. The very first class that I took was the poetry class. I actually missed a few classes today, but I did take the poetry class. That was the first one in the morning, I believe. And it was with Emily Ligren. She's, if you don't know already, she's the co-author with Jack in the How to Teach Nature Journaling book. And we did some exercises based on a leaf. And it's very similar to I Notice, I Wonder, It Reminds Me Of. And you basically start with I Notice, I Wonder, It Reminds Me Of, and then from there turn that into a poem. A couple things I want to point out about the tools I was using today. I started the day using my Fude de Monin pen that I've been refilling the adapter that you can get that's specifically for these, refilling that with a waterproof ink. And I was also using my gray Tombow pen quite a bit, and then every once in a while using this, I think this is the gel, just the jelly roll type gel pen for some of the highlights. I ended up running out of ink with this and having to refill, and this is also starting to run out of ink. So I had to transition partway through. But let me just read quickly my poem that I wrote about my carnivorous plant leaf, and this poem is based on the I Notice, I Wonder, It Reminds Me Of exercise. So if you haven't really incorporated that much poetry into your nature journaling, this is a really easy way for you to do that. I know I haven't used nature journaling, poetry that much in my nature journaling. So if I mess up my words or anything, it's because I've been up basically taking classes in nature journaling since about 8 this morning. So I'm going to read you the poem. I wonder what it feels like to be a sticky carnivorous leaf. How do those sticky hairs work? Like glistening jelly Velcro? Deadly dewdrops? I wonder what it feels like to be a tiny animal stuck to that consuming carnivorous carpet. What a way to die. What are those shiny little black things on the leaves? Are those tiny little unlucky beetles, unfortunate enough to hatch from the soil that houses these innocent looking living flypaper plants? So that's basically just the little bit of poem that I came up with from her exercise. So that was really fun. Fude de Monin. Yes, that is the Fude de Monin pin. I will put a link to it here. It's pretty cool. I mean, I actually really like drawing with it, but it's a little bit annoying. It runs out of ink too fast and is a little bit too, oh, Australia, let's go back over there. my snake's coming and looking at the keyboard here. They're in a slightly not the best mood. Okay, anyway, switching back over here to the document camera, and I'm trying to get through my pages here. So that was the poetry class. That was really fun. If you're not including poetry already in your nature journal, you can. It's not that hard. It doesn't have to be perfect. Poems hide, and it's just up to us to find them in our lives. Emily is a great teacher, really great at leading the exercises. Here are some more sketch notes from that session. You can see that the pages don't need to be polished. This is the point where I ran out of ink with the Fude Demonin and switched over to this one, which I'm running out of the gray ink on this. And I'm almost filled up my whole nature journal during this conference. So here are some notes about the poetry class, which was great. Over here, I did a drawing of how I refilled the Fude Demonin, and I've been told that there's easier ways for me to do this. I think Angie said I'm doing this wrong. Maybe I am. I haven't really figured out the fountain pen stuff completely yet, but once I filled it up, I was able to use it again. And then we had a gouache class. I missed the class on how to make your own nature journal, so I can't wait to learn more about that. But what I did is I went to the store and I bought some gouache for Liz Clayton Fuller's class, and I actually created a little palette here. This is the same palette, same plastic palette as the one that John Muir Law's watercolors come in, but now I set it up with gouache. And I tried to not spend too much money, but if this was this number of colors, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 colors, was like $116. So paints are really expensive, but I do still have the tubes, so I can refill these. And I'm telling you, I think it was probably worth it because I haven't really experimented that much with gouache, but it's such an amazing medium to work with. And I really had fun in Liz Clayton Fuller's class. She is an illustrator in addition to nature journaling, and she mostly does bird illustrations, and she's loving gouache. This is sort of a diagram of her setup on her table. She has a type of palette up here with, I believe, 24 colors, and it closes off completely so it doesn't dry out. She has 2 things with water. Then she has a separate palette for mixing. I thought that was really interesting. I always have assumed these have to be the same thing, maybe because in my my palette that I use in the field, the mixing areas in the paint storage, but in this case, paint is stored here and it's mixed here. Her paper towel, her paper, and her brushes. It was a super fun class, and she had a really good setup. It's kind of fun geeking out on other teachers' setups and seeing how they do their recording. She has a really cool overhead camera setup, and she also had a really good microphone. So I don't know if any of you out there noticed, but the sound in her video was really, really good. And that's not the case always for us online teachers. So I appreciate it when people put in that effort. But this is a Stillman and Bern sketchbook right here. It's the Nova series. It's the soft cover one because this was all they had when I went out last minute. I originally got this for Steda's class. She's going to be teaching about using gouache and sketching on toned paper. I'm not sure if I'm going to end up filling this all up. I might turn this into another traveling journal, maybe a traveling journal just for viewers of the Nature Journal show. So if you think that's a good idea, post something in the comments. In the regular comments would be good as opposed to the chat. But let me know if you like the idea of doing a traveling journal where I do a few pages, mail it off to the next person, they do a few pages, and then we keep sending it around like that. And that could be for people watching the Nature Journal show. I'm probably going to start one like that for people who are on my Patreon also. So that was a great class. But basically what it means is now I have 2 separate sketchbooks for the event. And that to me, maybe it's just because I'm slightly OCD or something, but the idea of having a little bit in this sketchbook and a little bit in this sketchbook, and the fact that I started taking notes for her class up here and then had to switch is a little bit not ideal. The next class I was able to make it to was the one where Jack and Fiona talked about curiosity. It was really great, and it was also some repetition from the class earlier this week that Jack taught for the teacher conference, where he talked about the 3 types of questions: the let's see questions, the could it be questions, and the let it be questions. So basically, for those of you who didn't make it to those, what the let's see questions are, most of natural history questions. I think I did a whole recap on this page earlier, but that right there is Charles Darwin, and he asked let's see questions such as, when do the geese return to your pond? Those are questions that you can answer in your nature journal by observing, by let's see. Let's go out and see, and you can just collect a lot of information and find the answer. Then there's also the could it be questions. The could it be questions require a hypothesis and then testing predictions and trying to disprove yourself. That's what science often does. It requires narrowing down a lot on specific questions and predictions. And then the last type of questions are things such as, how does the goose feel inside, or what does the goose think about its migration? So those are questions that can't be answered with science, and they can be approached with spirituality, poetry, philosophy, things like that. So he repeated some of that in his class that he gave today with Fiona. They did mention this thing that I should point out, which is one of Fiona's techniques, and this is called the question chain. This is basically when you show how your questions are connected and you continue to write them on the page. So an example would be, this is sort of adapted from the example that Fiona gave, but it's, how many cubic feet of water are in that wave? How would I measure that is one question that comes off of that. How much water is in the top versus the bottom of the wave? How does this show the energy in the wave, if it shows the energy at all? If this is a factor, is this a factor of the bottom topography mostly? So you can see these questions are connected to each other, and that is a question chain. I think just knowing this term could be useful for you when you're trying to come up with more questions. The other important thing to know about when talking about questions, and I did a whole video about the taxonomy of questions that covers some of this, cross-cutting concepts. So there's 7 cross-cutting concepts that are structure and function, systems, energy and matter, stability, change, patterns, perspective, scale, proportion, quantity, cause, and effect. And those are really useful when you're using curiosity and questions in your nature journal. So let's practice this really briefly right now. I'm going to point the document camera at my snake, and you can write questions in the chat that you have about what you observe. It's all, there we go. All right, so go ahead and write in your journal or in the chat any questions that you have, and see if you can make a question chain. Those cords look like snakes too. Let me move all these cords out of the way. It's okay, Astragalus. Astragalus likes it back there because it's kind of warm, I think. Someone's feeling shy. Okay, back to the recap of the Wild Wonder Nature Journaling Conference. I didn't do the best drawing of Liz Clayton Fuller, but I'm trying to at least draw people when they teach. And this is one of those things that I need to practice doing Fearless Friday on, just drawing people and at least trying it over and over again. This class was really cool with Erica Stevens, or Steffens, I'm not sure. She has worked at Dinosaur National Monument, and she took us on a virtual nature journaling field trip to the Jurassic, which was super cool. And just the idea of nature journaling dinosaurs is really cool. I've never nature journaled dinosaurs before. I think the last time I drew a dinosaur was probably when I was a little kid. That was really fun. and I used mostly I used the Fude de Manin, and you can see that the ink I'm using now is definitely waterproof because I did all this watercolor right on top of the ink. And just check out how much line variation you can get with this single black pen. So from this thin of a line, or that look how thin that line is there, to these thick lines, and these are done in one single line up here with that same pen. So it's really versatile, and look at how easy it is to put watercolor on top of it with the ink that I'm using now, which is the carbon ink in the Fude de Manin. So really like this pen. If it were just easier to fill, that would be great. So that was a fun class. You know, you can take these classes in the post-conference package. I think there's like a cheaper deal if you just sign up for the videos, for those of you who haven't yet. I did a good job, I think, trying to sketchnote during the keynote. Richard Louvre spoke, and I hope to interview him someday on the Nature Journal show. But he's the author of Last Child in the Woods and several other books, such as Nature Deficit Disorder. And I just recently read his book, and it was really interesting. But some of the highlights from his talk is basically he said that the most important thing for us to do is pay attention. And I think that is so in alignment, obviously, with nature journaling. And he's saying that this is the main thing that our society is really needing to do. He also said that one of the things he thinks is most important is the recording of the internal part when we're in nature, the recording of our feelings when we're in nature. And this is something that we often might forget, but nature journaling yourself. So when you're out there in the field, like, what are you feeling? What's coming up for you? And getting some of that on the page. I think poetry is one of the ways to do that. And I also think just sort of these metacognitive notes that I like to promote are a good way too. He talked about human loneliness. He thinks that loneliness is basically a huge human problem right now, a health problem, and there's studies that he shares that demonstrate this. And he thinks part of it is a species loneliness, that our species has separated itself from animals, and that's why you see more and more people wanting to have pets or wanting to connect to animals in different ways. All of the toys that little kids have, even in urban places, almost all of those little toys that they start off with as kids are animals. If you see how many animals there are in the home, it's really obvious. So he really thinks that natural playgrounds and other ways that people can get out into nature frequently are going to be essential moving forward. And he says that when we talk about someone's social capital, we should also talk about their connection to animals. So in addition to when we say social capital, like, yes, this person has friends, family, etc., we should talk about their connection to other animals and their ability to access those animals. He mentioned this concept of ecophobia and fear, and how so many kids are perhaps being bombarded at too early of a stage with very abstract and very negative portrayals of nature, so that nature is either a dangerous place or it's a place that's in danger. And this information is brought at an age when kids have not created an emotional connection to nature. And if this comes first, he thinks it can cause them to develop too much fear and never ever be able to really fall in love with nature. He says here in this quote, "If you fear something, it is hard to love it. If you don't love something, it is hard to protect it." And then he went on to say something that is almost sort of different in some ways. But he said that, today a lot of kids are overly protected and not allowed to go into nature and take risks or do dangerous things. And he said, nature is not completely safe or comfortable, and that is actually one of its benefits, that to experience things such as awe and experience some of these other essential human feelings that help us connect to nature, help us feel less lonely, and help us feel like our life is more meaningful. To have some of those, it is sometimes necessary to be slightly uncomfortable and to take some risks. So he brought that around to this concept of awe and the importance of experiencing awe. And then this is where he started to talk about how the environmental movement hasn't really done a great job here, because he said this isn't so much about data, it's about relationships. And even though he believes in evidence-based evidence, he believes in having evidence to support beliefs and decisions, he thinks that data is not really the thing that's affecting people, that people need to have their heart change. So he said that environmentalism has gotten stuck in the data, and the data is not changing people's hearts. He then used an expression, imaginative hope, to describe a sort of positive vision of the future, because he pointed out, somewhat worrisomely, that what happens to a society that cannot envision anything nicer than a post-apocalyptic future. And this was really poignant to me, because I realized that a lot of people that I know, and myself even, a lot of my life, I have had this sort of idea that, you know, most of the future possibilities that I can imagine are, you know, extremely problematic in terms of like lack of resources or climate change or extinction of species and stuff like that, and that we might be going around carrying those negative visions in our head and not have come up with something positive that we would want to fight for and replace it with. So he said, you know, that story is really important, and that journals could be a way to communicate that vision for the future. Here I sort of did a little bit of a sort of diagram showing this thing that Jack mentioned in the interview with Richard Louv, that I've noticed and I think is really funny. But a lot of times you'll have a nature journaler here putting attention on something, looking at something, whether it's a lizard or a mouse poop or a rare flower, and other people who are walking by stop, and because that nature journaler is looking at that thing, they look at it too, and they think that it is worthy of attention. Whereas on a normal day, that natural thing is there, and that person just walks right by without noticing it. And this happens at the zoo. I've noticed if there's a group of nature journalers in front of an otherwise boring animal that most people wouldn't even look at, or maybe it's really hidden, and there's a group of nature journalers drawing that animal, all of these other people who were before just walking by that exhibit are going to stop and take photos or try to look at what the nature journaler is looking at. So at this point, Richard kind of issued a challenge for the nature journalers and recommended that we attend to the habitat of the heart. This was another expression of his, the habitat of the heart. Attend to the habitat of the heart and try to describe it in your nature journal. So at the end, it was asked for him to bring up, you know, what he thought, what his imaginative hope was, you know. And he told stories a lot during his talk, which was very helpful and very useful way of sharing his ideas. But his imaginative hope, his sort of vision for the future that is positive, is seeing more nature brought into cities, and cities becoming more nature rich. Biophilic design in schools and buildings. How can we bring more nature into the cities? And build it even into the buildings. The creation of wildlife corridors. Cities as engines of biodiversity. Schools that, instead of being about standardized tests, are about kids finding their place in the universe. He said, we need to be imagining that nature-rich future, not Blade Runner and Mad Max. And then one of the last things he said is that he's full of great quotes. You know, it's really awesome. He said, how can we not only tell stories about our past in nature, but tell stories about our future in nature? He also mentioned, last but not least, the more technology we live with, the more we need nature and time in nature. So at that point, it switched over to just, there was 15-minute breaks, and then there was the sort of after show conversation. I took out my snake astragalus from their enclosure and started to draw them, because I felt like with all the technology that I had today, it was time for me to connect with a little bit of non-human nature. And so I sketched my snake for a little bit and held my snake. And now we switched over to the after conversation, and my snake just stayed here on the table on my desk. And so I did some sketches of them, and I tried to do some more sketchnoting during the after the backstage conference sort of chat. And so that chat is actually just ended at 9:30. So if you can believe it, some people are starting this at 8 in the morning. And then I think the longest break is like a 30-minute break. Maybe there's a 40. If you went to all the pencil miles and social things, I think the longest break you would get would be a 30-minute break. And then you would finish at 9:30. So it is doable. It's not necessarily recommendable. And then you could watch my show after that. But I did these drawings of the snake. And the last thing I'm going to mention is someone in the after party was mentioning how they're going to be hired as a naturalist to lead a group or to be with a group, guide a group of blind kids in nature, and what kinds of activities would be good for them, or what would be some ways to do some nature connection with them. So I recorded some notes from the group during that, and it was super interesting. One thing I want to point out is a quote from Kate Rudder, and she said, "We don't have access and disability issues, we have design issues." And she was paraphrasing Auguste de la Reyes, who I think recently passed, but spoke out a lot about ableism, disability issues, and the built environment, and how a lot of our built environment is designed for certain types of people and not for other types of people. And that is including people who don't have the same vision that the rest of us take for granted. So I thought that was really interesting. Kate Rudder is also a Patreon patron, and I see a bunch of other people over here in the chat who are also Patreon patrons. Thanks to all of you. Sandra is a patron. A bunch of people over here are patrons and very loyal viewers, so I really appreciate all of you. And for those of you who can't make it this year to the Nature Journaling Conference, you can always tune in here to the Nature Journal Show, and I'll be doing these recaps at the end of the day. If you don't know about my Patreon, it's basically a membership-based platform. We have a party for patrons only, like every 2 or 3 months. We talk about the Nature Journal Show, upcoming ideas for the Nature Journal Show, and I release content there for patrons only. And most importantly, for as little as like $1 a month, you can support me in the work that I'm doing to bring nature journaling to more people and to keep the information flowing in the nature journaling community. So I appreciate all of you for tuning in. Thanks for the, I'm gonna just run through here real quick and see if there's any, I think that there was a question about ink, so I'm gonna point that out really quick. So let me grab that. Sandra asked what kind of ink I'm using, and I'm using this carbon ink right here. I did some research on what types of ink that are waterproof actually work with fountain pens, because apparently a lot of waterproof inks have sediments that can build up and clog. However, this one is supposed to do very well, so that's why I am using it. And the only thing I don't like is just how fast this runs out of ink. But it might also be the fact that it can put down so much ink, and that's what I like about it. Like, look at this drawing right here is putting down a lot of ink, and based on my measurement, this thing only holds, I think I wrote it down when I refilled it. Oh yeah, I refilled this thing twice today. It holds 0.5, it seems like it only holds 0.5 milliliters of ink, which is hardly anything. Oh, cool, Deb is here. Glad you could make it, Deb. Deb taught a class at a previous Wild Wonder about how to do bubble lettering and different types of lettering, so that's awesome. Deb is also a Patreon patron. Thank you so much. All right, everybody, I think it's time that we all go to sleep, get some sleep, and so we can do more conference stuff tomorrow. And for those of you who aren't at the conference, or who are watching this later, you can tune in around the same time tomorrow. I'll do another recap because there's some good stuff coming tomorrow. I can't wait, and I'm probably going to finish. I'm probably going to run out of pages in this journal, so I might need to do another emergency art supply to get another journal. All right, good night, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. Bye.